Week 1 is here. Week 0 was kind of like an appetizer for what's to come this weekend and beyond. We saw Notre Dame dominate in Dublin to start off the day. We had some thrilling finishes. UTEP and Jacksonville State went down to the wire. Jacksonville State picking up the victory in their FBS debut. FIU and Louisiana Tech, that game also came down to the wire. USC got off to a bit of a slow start, but as the game went on, they were more dominant. But the defense for USC still a little bit suspicious going into the season. But overall, my final thoughts on week 0, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart that your support last week for week 0 was amazing. Over 5,000 views on that video, and I also gained over 120 new subscribers. I have not seen my channel grow in 1 week like that in a very long time. And your support last week, it meant everything to me. Without further ado, let's get into week 1, as we have a plethora of storylines, but the biggest ones: Matt Rhule makes his coaching debut with the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Deion Sanders makes his coaching debut with Colorado. A Carolina battle in Charlotte, North Carolina and South Carolina. And the biggest storyline of the week: a top 10 showdown in Orlando on Sunday night. Number 5 LSU and number 8 Florida State. Without further ado, let's get into the week 1 predictions. We are kicking things off with a battle in the Big Ten West, Nebraska and Minnesota. For Nebraska, it is the first game of the Matt Rhule era. Nebraska, in last season's matchup against the Golden Gophers, they held their own. They led 10-0 at halftime. But in the second half, Athen Kaliakmanis come out of the game for Minnesota, and they outscored Nebraska 20-3. Minnesota currently has a 4-game winning streak against the Huskers. Back in the day, it was guaranteed Nebraska would win their season opener. However, since 2015, 3-5 in season openers. And there are reports that Minnesota wants to tweak their offensive philosophy a little bit, which does make a lot of sense. There are reports they want to be more of a passing team than years past. They were reliant on the running game. Idmo Ibrahim, but he is now gone. And we did kind of see towards the end of the season Minnesota passing a little more often than what you would realize. They did pick up Sean Tyler in the transfer portal. In the last 2 seasons, he was a 1,000-yard rusher for Western Michigan. And I think this game is going to go a long way into determining who wins the Big Ten West, as I do think Jeff Sims, who's making his debut for the Huskers at quarterback, and Athen Kaliakmanis, I do think that these are 2 of the more underrated quarterbacks in college football. And they are both getting the opportunity. And whoever wins this game, they have momentum going into the rest of the season, which I feel like that's pretty much of a vague statement to say, considering that I do think that both these teams, they are capable of having an 8 or 9 win season. Now, Nebraska released their depth chart, and Gabe Ervin Jr. is slated as a starting running back. But Anthony Grant, who was a difference maker for the Huskers in last season's matchup with 115 rushing yards and over 5.5 yards a carry, including a 36-yard run to start the game, which established early momentum for Nebraska, is the 3rd-string running back. So I really want to see if Anthony Grant is going to have an impact in this game. And for Minnesota, the big targets: Chris Ottman-Bell and tight end Brevin Spann-Ford. Now, am I walking myself into a trap by picking Nebraska? Maybe. I am going to pick Nebraska to win outright. Worst case scenario, I think Nebraska does cover. I'll be surprised if Minnesota wins this game by more than 8 points. I do think this game will be pretty low scoring. And I just like the culture that Matt Rhule's building. I think what he's been building in this offseason I think it's going to translate into some momentum for Nebraska, and I think they win this game. We have another Thursday night game. Florida goes on the road to take on 14th ranked Utah. And in last year's matchup, Florida won 29-26. However, the MVP of that game, Anthony Richardson, who had 106 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns, left for the NFL. And Wisconsin transfer Graham Mertz was named the starting quarterback for the Gators. But before I say anything else, as much as I thought that Billy Napier could have been that guy for Florida, he's coming into the season on the hot seat. Florida only has 11 returning starters this season, 6 on offense and 5 on defense. For Utah, the defending back-to-back Pac-12 champions, 16 returning starters, 7 on offense and 9 on defense, which that's going to be huge. Can Utah stop the running game for Florida? As Montrell Johnson averaged 5.4 yards per carry last season, and Trevor Etienne averaged just over 6 yards per carry. Now last season, Cameron Rising, he threw for over 3,000 yards, 26 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions, which those are very good quality numbers. Tight end Brant Kuithe, he had an impact in last season's game. Dalton Kincaid is now gone. He's with the Buffalo Bills now. He had 70 catches last season for Utah. And I do think that Brant Kuithe is simply the next man up. I think Brant Kuithe is going to have an impact in this game on Thursday night as well. And I do think that this is going to be a solid quarterback matchup. Graham Mertz and Cameron Rising. Graham Mertz, throughout his college career, he has had his moments. He's had some positive moments and some negative moments. Perhaps a change of scenery, perhaps that's good for his morale. But unfortunately, the Graham Mertz that I've seen more often than not has featured negative moments despite having some positive moments. I'm going to go with Utah in this matchup. I think that they get their redemption from last season. But I do think it's possible Florida does cover in this game. If I was someone that was doing the betting, Utah -7, that's not something I would necessarily want to bet on, as I am back and forth on if I think Utah covered or not. But I do think Utah does win this game outright, and they get their redemption from last season. Next matchup, Colorado goes on the road to take on 17th ranked TCU. Right now the line is set at TCU -20.5. So we're looking for TCU to win by 3 touchdowns for the cover. For Colorado, it is the first game in the Deion Sanders era with a completely new roster, as Colorado went to work in the transfer portal this offseason, as they have a total of over 50 players on their roster this season from the transfer portal. I believe 76 new players on the roster in all. Some of the transfers that stick out to me, of course, quarterback Shedeur Sanders, Deion Sanders' son. Wide receiver Travis Hunter, who was a former 5-star recruit. And Alton McCaskill IV, who had a really strong performance at Houston, and now he transfers over to Colorado. Those are the 3 big playmakers for Colorado if they not only want to have a chance at covering the 20.5, but pulling out the upset outright. However, I don't think that happens, though. I don't think they even come close to winning outright, and I don't think they cover either. Because by the look of things throughout the offseason, I've seen some people say that Colorado looks like a high school team with the way they look, the way they're sized. TCU, they're going to be fired up in this game. The last time we saw them on the field, They got absolutely embarrassed in the championship game, 65-7. They lost big contributors to 2022's team in Max Duggan, Quentin Johnston, and Kendre Miller, just to name a few. Only 10 returning starters for TCU. The good news is, however, 7 of them were from the defense, and that includes 5 of their top 6 tacklers from last season. And quarterback Chandler Morris, his redemption arc, as he talked about how the Jalen Hurts story, it inspired him to play the chip on his shoulder. And I think without a doubt, TCU wins this game and they cover. I will be surprised if TCU does not cover in this matchup, as this is going to be a team that Sonny Dykes is going to have ready to go in this matchup on Saturday. And I think they win big. Next matchup, Boise State and number 10 Washington. For Boise State, 14 returning starters, 9 on offense and 5 on defense, which includes quarterback Taylon Green. When he was under center for the Broncos last season, their offense took a big leap compared to when it was Hank Bachmeier under center. Hank Bachmeier went into the transfer portal. Taylon Green took over. And Boise State, they look like a much better team. Their top 4 receivers from last season are back. Latrell Capples, Billy Bowen, Stephon Cobbs, and Eric McAllister. Now, Boise State was 8th in total defense last season. And a big question mark for me for this matchup, for Boise State to pull off the upset, as they are 15.5-point underdogs at this very moment. Can their defense keep them in the game? Andy Avalos, the coach for Boise State, he's a defensive guy at heart. He was Oregon's defensive coordinator before taking the Boise State job. His alma mater, by the way. For Washington, 15 returning starters, 7 on offense and 8 on defense, which includes quarterback Michael Penix Jr., who I think is going to have a phenomenal season. I think he is a lock to be a Heisman finalist. I think he has the potential of being the Heisman winner this season. Their top 3 receivers from 2022 are back in Roma Dunze, Jalen McMillan, and Jalen Polk. Their sack leader, Braylon Rice, is back. But unfortunate news that Washington received last week, their starting running back, Cameron Davis, is out for the season. But despite Cameron Davis being out for the year, I think Washington's offense is going to be too tough for Boise State to handle. I do have Washington winning the Pac-12, and I do think that they will make the college football playoff as that 4th seed. Now, usually for the college football playoff, it's usually a couple teams you expect and a team that you don't necessarily expect. And I think a candidate this year for that title is Washington to make the college football playoff. If Michael Penix Jr. has a good season, I think Washington will find themselves in the college football playoff. And I think Washington, they do win this game. But the question is, are they going to cover this 15.5? Which I do think it's possible, but it is week 1, and a lot of teams, they get flustered, they get nervous, and sometimes games can be much closer than you want them to be. But I think Washington will be just fine in this game. Next matchup, Labor Day night, number 9 Clemson and Duke. Clemson is returning 15 starters from last season, 7 on offense and 8 on defense. Can Cade Klubnik take the next leap for Clemson? As Clemson, they have had subpar seasons the last couple of years to their standards, as they're a team that wants to compete for the national championship every single season, but 2 disappointments of seasons in a row for Clemson based off their standards. Their star running back Will Shipley is back, who ran for 1,182 yards and 15 touchdowns last season. As I do think that Clemson, they are going to be very good defensively. They should have one of the best defenses in college football. But they start their season against an underrated Duke team, and I have seen a lot of people call this game a potential trap game, and rightfully so. Duke returns 18 starters, 10 on offense and 8 on defense. Now, this is a very tough schedule for Duke here, as they are the only team in the ACC to face off against 9+ teams that made it to a bowl game last season. Jalen Calhoun and Jordan Moore both had 60+ receptions for Duke last season. And a big reason why I think people think this may be a trap game, not only 18 returning starters, but they didn't lose a single game last season by double digits. I think a lot of people are going to pick Duke to cover the spread here, which they honestly could. But this personally wouldn't be a game that I would touch, as I'm leaning towards Clemson to win by at least 2 touchdowns. I get that Duke is very underrated coming into the year, and Clemson has a couple question marks, especially at the quarterback position if Cade Klubnik can take that next leap. But I'm going to pick Clemson to win this game. I'm just not sold on Clemson getting off to a slow start this season. I think Clemson, they're going to win at the very least 10 or 11 games this season. And they're going to be the favorite to win the ACC. Their biggest competition is Florida State. But I do think Clemson, they do win this game on Labor Day night. But I am interested to see how Duke is going to look in this game. As Duke is a team that a lot of people like myself, I think, had the potential to fly under the radar, but I just can't see Duke winning this game. I know some people can, but I just can't. Up next, we have a Battle of the Carolinas. Number 21 North Carolina versus South Carolina. And I cannot wait to watch this game. This is the game that College Game Day will be going to this week. And I love the quarterback battle in this matchup. Drake May versus Spencer Rattler. And I anticipate that both these quarterbacks are going to have a phenomenal game, because both defenses, they were not good last year. North Carolina allowed an average of 30.8 points per game, 437 yards per game. While South Carolina, they allowed an average of 29 points per game and 458 yards per game. South Carolina only has 10 returning starters, 6 on offense and 4 on defense. North Carolina, they returned 17 starters, 9 on offense, 8 on defense, which includes quarterback Drake May, who I've already discussed, 4th in passing yards last season, and projected to be the second quarterback off the board in April's NFL draft, behind Caleb Williams. North Carolina, they do need to have somebody else step up in the pass game this season, as their top 2 receivers from last year in Josh Downs and Antoine Green are gone. And I have been back and forth on this matchup. South Carolina, they hit their stride in the second half of the year, towards the end of the year in the home stretch. While North Carolina, they declined towards the end of the year. So South Carolina, they're the more confident team coming into 2023 with that momentum and confidence. While North Carolina, they do return 9 offensive starters and 8 defensive starters. I think this is going to be a back and forth game. But I'm just going to go with the SEC in this one. I'm picking South Carolina. I was back and forth on this one. 1 minute I picked North Carolina. The second minute, South Carolina. I went back and forth until just now. I am picking South Carolina to win. I think this is going to be a hard-fought game. It's going to be a battle to the finish. And I anticipate a very high-scoring game with South Carolina coming out on top. And finally, our game of the week, number 5 LSU, number 8 Florida State, a top 10 showdown in Orlando on Sunday night. And when these two teams faced off last season, it was one of the best games this season. Very chaotic ending. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time, and I cannot wait to see what these two teams have in store for us this Sunday night, as it is going to be an absolute barn burner in Orlando. And I do not know who to pick in this game. I'm literally going to make a judgment call right here. For LSU, they'll be without Mason Smith for this game, as he is serving a 1-game suspension. LSU has 15 returning starters this season, 8 on offense and 7 on defense. Florida State, they returned 17 starters, 8 on offense and 9 on defense. LSU quarterback Jayden Daniels last season, 2,913 passing yards, 17 touchdowns, and only 3 interceptions. He also had 885 rushing yards last season with 11 rushing touchdowns. Jordan Travis, 3,214 passing yards last season, 24 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. And he also ran the ball pretty well as Jayden Daniels did. I believe he had 7 rushing touchdowns last season, but don't quote me on that as I'm not 100% sure right now. I forgot to write down on my notes here. Trey Benson, just under 1,000 rushing yards last season with 990. Florida State, they returned their sack leader last season in Jared Verse, who could have declared for the 2023 NFL Draft. He would have been, without a doubt, a first-round pick. But he is back for the Seminoles this season. And Johnny Wilson, the 6'7", 240-pounder, I think is a mismatch for just about anyone. And I think he is a sleeper candidate to win the Biletnikoff Award. Malik Neighbors, 1,017 receiving yards last season, the leading receiver for LSU last year. And I think this is a redemption game for him, as he had 2 muffed punts in the game last season, but they did not lead to any Florida State points. The first one led to a turnover on downs. The second one, Florida State fumbled at the 1-yard line, giving LSU a chance to go 99 yards down the field to tie the game, which they got the touchdown, but a blocked extra point gave Florida State the 24-23 win. And like I said at the beginning of this segment here, I don't know who to pick. This is literally a judgment call, as this is going to be an absolute barn burner. But I am going to pick LSU to win this game, as I think this is going to be fairly similar to the game last season, although the ending is not going to be the same. But I have LSU on top. I think it's going to be a 3-point win for LSU, as whoever wins this game is going to have the first big accolade in the college football playoff race. They're going to get the first big resume booster. I think that goes to LSU in what's going to be a very, very intense battle all night long in Orlando. And that will do it for my Week 1 college football predictions. Comment your picks down below. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. Also, if there is a game that I did not cover that you would like my thoughts on, please leave it in the comment section down below, and I will give you my thoughts. Until next time, have a wonderful day or evening, whenever you happen to be listening, and enjoy the college football this weekend.